What's up, storytellers? I'm C.R. Rowanson, the Magic Engineer, and it's time to talk about magic. This video is another installment in the Make It Fresh series, where I take a standard magic system archetype or trope and see what we can do to turn it on its head and make it into something new and interesting. I'm going to be following the standard format that I've done with the last couple of videos, where I look at the core attributes of the trope. I then explore whether you should change it, and then last we talk about how to change it. This time, we're talking about superpowers and superheroes. So, without further ado, let's get into it, expose these ideas to dangerous levels of radiation, and see what they mutate into. Step 1, identifying the attributes. When we're talking superheroes, these stories most commonly take place, and this magic most commonly takes place in a large metropolis area. Not only that, the people with the superpowers are very often embroiled in crime, sometimes politics, but usually they are fighting crime and injustice in their world, specifically in order to maintain the status quo. They want to keep people from disrupting the balance, and this is actually connected to a trope that you can find on TV tropes called the status quo is God. And we see this a lot because these heroes and these characters are very focused on fighting and stopping anything that would disrupt the system, to the point that they will even refuse to use their own powers or their own technologies in order to change things in any kind of large scale, which can be frustrating when they do have the technology to literally change the world. But I digress. That is an important part of this trope, is their fight to maintain the status quo. This also ties into the standard trope that we know of as capes and costumes and alter egos. This is a whole thing where with superheroes, they're always trying to protect their identity in terms of protecting themselves from liability. They're technically vigilantes, which is illegal. Oftentimes, they do have some kind of grudging support or relationship with the local law enforcement so that they can handle some of the issues where the standard law enforcement either can't or won't. Those are very important aspects and common aspects of this magic system archetype. When we're talking about superpowers and superheroes, the flux of the system, the change in prevalence over time, is very often positive. It's predominantly positive. We start with no magic users, and as the series or world continues to progress and develop, the number of magic users just continues to climb, both in terms of heroes and in terms of villains. This is some good and some bad. This does also bring into play the fact that, at least at some point, most of these stories and this archetype involves people who are fresh to their power. So they go through an experimentation phase and their origin story, which we're all very familiar with. And that's another piece of this, is even though the number of magic users always seems to be on the climb, and the power of the individual magic users is also rising as people get better at what they're doing and learn new tricks, we never seem to hit critical mass with this archetype. There's never a point where it switches fully from low prevalence to medium, and definitely not from medium prevalence to high, with a few exceptions, like I think it was the City of Heroes MMORPG, and the entire plot behind that was suddenly everything shifted to high prevalence. But for the most part, with these archetype, it usually stays around low to medium low, even as it does ramp up, and the prevalence does slowly increase over time. It stays in that lower region. And usually I try and have some more comic beats in my videos. That's not really happening today, so just insert witty remark here and laugh for me, even if it's just a pity laugh. I'll take it. Next, let's talk about the nature of the powers in this kind of magic system. Most often, the powers of an individual magic user are kind of thematic and will hold together under some kind of scrutiny and logic, but it becomes very disparate and disjointed when you start looking across multiple magic users. If you're familiar with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you know exactly what I'm talking about. One hero is going to be very different from another hero. They're all part of the same system, but they all kind of function independently. Now, the only thing that really carries over is high levels of strength and endurance, because that's how we get the epic fights that we see all the time. Those are some things that are universal across everything. And other people do have it to more extreme levels. If you're ever wanting a exhaustive list of the types of powers that we see in different superhero systems and stories, you should check out the Superpower wiki. That's what it is. It's nothing but pages and pages of these different magical effects and superhero abilities that we see in different stories. It's a pretty good resource if you want to know more about what has been done and where you might want to start with things. I'm forgetting something. I know I'm forgetting something. Ensembles. A very popular application of this magic system archetype is using it to generate ensemble stories where you have a bunch of different people coming together to form a team in order to solve a problem. We see it with X-Men, we see it with the Avengers, we see it with Justice League, we see it all over the place. And it makes sense. It's very satisfying to have these people with very unique powers come together and learn how to support each other and enhance each other's abilities, or in some cases even counter the negative effects of their abilities. It's very interesting to watch. It's a great playground for character interaction, and it is just something that is very popular with this archetype and something you should keep in mind. Now that you know the archetype, should you change the archetype? On the surface level, this is very simple. You just need to ask the same question that we always ask in this case. How do you feel about the trope? And how do you feel about the archetype? Are you okay with how it is and you just want to deliver more of the same? If so, that's totally fine. That said, this archetype in particular is a little more complicated because to a certain extent, you do need to change it, but that's more changing the nature of the magic system rather than the archetype itself. Because you have to change things enough that you're not having to worry about any kind of plagiarism or copyright issues, which is a bigger deal with superpowers than it is with a lot of the other magic system archetypes. So it's something to bear in mind. Going to interrupt the flow of the video real quick because if you're enjoying the content in this video, please do like and subscribe. It really helps a lot and it drives more people to my videos, and I just like sharing this stuff and helping people. Seriously, I do. But enough of this, back to your regularly scheduled content. To be clear, if you don't want to change the superhero archetype, you don't have to. Saying no and keeping it the way that it is actually the simplest way to move forward. So if you really enjoy the superhero setup, that's no different than pulling from the standard fantasy setup or a standard sci-fi setting. It's something that is regularly accepted, and it can actually be a shortcut to introduce your readers and your audience to a variety of common concepts and common problems. Not only that, this is a very solid way if you're really wanting to replicate the feeling of a specific era or time period. Like if you wanted to harken back to the days of classic Marvel or anything like that, you're gonna have to stick closer to the trope and change fewer things. And just like any other archetype that we've gone over or will go over, it's a framework, it's a starting place, and it can save you a lot of time and effort in terms of building things up in your story. But in my personal opinion, as Clark, I think you should change some things from the Superpowers archetype. There are some things that are built into that are just better if we let them go. This is going to be a bit of a sensitive area for some people, I know. There are some social issues that need to be considered when you are picking up the superpower archetype. The most common one is the blank girl moniker. We kind of need to stop that. Supergirl, Batgirl, Wonder Girl, like any of those, we need to step back on those. It's a product of the time, and it's part of our history, and it's something that can't be ignored, even if there wasn't any ill intent by it. Now, it can come across as a bit demeaning. So if you're going to have girl as a moniker, you definitely need to have some people that have boy as a moniker. I think it is probably better if we can just step back and get rid of the man, woman, boy, girl altogether and come up with some more interesting superhero names. If you've watched this channel much, you know that I love Brandon Sanderson, and some great examples of that are in the Reckoners series. Steelheart is an awesome superhero name, or in this case, supervillain name. Firefight, Mirkwood, any of these, you just completely bypass this issue, and you can too. And yes, that is an integrated part of the archetype, and it's one that I think we can leave behind. Which leads us into another, even more sensitive one, which is the tendency to use superpowers to negate disabilities and challenges in our characters. If somebody can't walk, we give them a flying superpower or a telekinetic superpower. Or if somebody is blind, they have additional senses that let them see. I don't pretend to know how all of this factors into all of the situations, but it's something to consider, and something you should research on your own is that isn't actually representation for those people and can be kind of hurtful in some ways. So I don't want to get into it more than that because I am still learning about this a lot myself, but it's something to bear in mind. Try not to pull a Daredevil where you make him go blind and then immediately give him a power that gives him a different version of sight so that his true power is just vision plus, kind of. Try to avoid that and do your own research and see how you're feeling. You're the only one who can draw the line. This is something that we need to explore and probably need to leave behind us in terms of this archetype. The last reason that I think you should twist this archetype in particular is because of how much it's used. I don't want to say that it's overdone, but it is well worn, and it's very important in this archetype more than any other that you do come up with some kind of creative and new take on it, either in terms of powers or the application. I don't just want to see a repeat of the X-Men, or I would just go read more X-Men. So I think you probably should change it, which leads us right into the next segment where we talk about ways that you can. See how smooth that was? Until I ruined it just there. Oh well. One of the big factors with this archetype is the setting. It's usually a metropolis setting in modern day. I think I forgot to mention that earlier. But in modern day or close to modern day. So change it. It would be very interesting to see more superhero type stories and systems in different settings. You could put it in historical settings. In fact, there is a graphic novel, which is Marvel 1602, which is very fascinating and takes place, I believe it's in the Dark Ages. 1602 is probably when it takes place. Come on, Clark. Duh. You could also put it in a more sci-fi setting or even a horror setting, because I love me some horror. There's just a land of possibilities for you to explore. X-Men in space? I'd read that. X-Men in a haunted house? I'd read that. X-Men in an insane asylum, where they are being experimented on, I believe was a movie that was coming out, and then I just never heard of it again, so I can't even tell you what the name is, but I would have eaten that up. Setting and genre often go hand in hand, right? You could do it in a more Elizabethan or even a Victorian setting and use that to go from standard crime fighting to actually tell more of a romance plot, which would be interesting because just because you have the power to punch through the sun doesn't make dating any easier. In fact, it would probably make it harder, which would make for some very interesting and unique conflict for you to add into your story. And beyond just the crime fighting, shift what it is that they're rallying against, even if you change nothing else. There's a variety of different things that you could deal with. For one, it could be an invasion, and I'm not talking about an alien invasion. Alien invasion gets done a lot, or invasion by other superheroes, but just a cadre of war heroes who are trying to stave off an invasion from another country, especially if they have superheroes of their own. That would be interesting to me, for sure. You can also change their focus to be the eradication of a threat, like if there's monsters wandering around that are wreaking havoc, or it's these people who are trying to help humanity survive on a new world. any of these kinds of things would be interesting, and even as I say it, I realize I'm kind of just rehashing parts of He Who Fights with Monsters. So I think short version is give me more of He Who Fights with Monsters, and I'll be happy. Then there's the aspect of the alter ego and the costumes, right? Change that up. For one, you can make it so that the person's identity is actually part of their brand, like we see in One Punch Man. There's a lot of people where their superhero identity is them, and that is an important part of how they sell themselves and go through the ranks of the Superhero Institute. I don't remember quite what it's called. You could even make it so that superheroes go corporate, like in, I think it's The Boys, I think is what it is, where superheroes are part of a larger organization and their identity is protected by the organization, not necessarily by themselves. So they're still known at a certain level, just not to everybody. You could even use the power to constantly change the identity of the person themselves. We see this a little bit in The Wu Assassin, which I believe was on Netflix, where he was able to change his face and look like completely different people. You could exacerbate that so they actually become different people over time. It was the Wild Card anthology that was very interesting. There was a character who was continually rewritten. Their body changed, their powers changed, and every time that they went to sleep, everything changed on them. And that's why they ended up being known as the Sleeper, which is something I thought was very cool and very unique. We can also change the flux and the process of gaining the powers, and even the stage in which people are with experiencing their powers. Rather than always going from nothing to new and growing in experience, you could start with somebody who is more grizzled and well-worn with their powers. We could also change the flux so that it is more positive and things are rapidly growing out of control. We see that in a couple of stories here and there. You could even make it negative, where maybe superheroes have been around for a long time and they're starting to die off and the world doesn't know how to handle it anymore. It's this force of change and control that is just starting to fade into the background. Or you could even keep it neutral, where superheroes are either entering the world and replacing an old magic system, or a new magic system is replacing the magic system of superpowers with something that is more industrialized and universal. You could even change it so that each superhero has a mantle of power that has to be passed on. So there is a static number of superheroes, and it just gets handed off from one person to the next. All of those are that's just a couple of ways that you could play with the flux and how people gain the powers and that kind of stuff. Each of which would be, I think, pretty interesting to explore. One of the biggest things about superheroes and superpowers is how every magic user is different. They all have their unique powers, their unique themes. So one way you could change this would to add a common theme or common threads through all of them. Maybe it doesn't matter what your powers are. Every power can be interrupted or contained by a salt circle. Or every power relates to a very specific decision that everybody has to make. Or it even all of it centers around a specific concept in the world. Like if everybody's powers were animal related, or everybody's powers were plant related, or they had the same, we talked about weakness, maybe they have the same strength or the same limitation. Trying to find a way to connect all of them to make them feel like a single tapestry, a single tie-dyed tapestry with splashes of color here and there that are very different, but still one cohesive whole, would be quite interesting. And as we've been going through this, I have been trying to give examples of stories where some of this has already been done. And if you're well-versed in the archetype and you love superheroes, you're probably thinking of a bunch that I'm not even aware of. Which brings me to my final point in this video. More than any other archetype, this archetype has been well used and heavily explored. Which means most of these changes on the surface level have already been done in one place or another. And some of these have even become tropes of their own. And that's not a bad thing. Because once again, tropes are very useful and very powerful, and that means somebody has already done the work and made it function and made it enjoyable for somebody. And distinction is in the details. So even if there is somebody who has done a superheroes in space with salt circle limitations, even if somebody has already done that, you can still do it and do it in your own unique way. So don't retreat from this just because you feel it's been done before. It's at this point, a lot of these are just their subspecializations, like urban fantasy or dark fantasy or space opera. So just be aware of what you're working with and then kind of lean into it and find the places, like we've talked about here, like we've talked about in this video, where you can tweak it and make it your own. And that's really all I've got for this video. So thank you so much for being here. Again, make sure you like, subscribe, and please share with anybody you think would enjoy it. And that's it. So until next time, whatever you do, keep writing and stay awesome.